When I pulled into the Baxtera parking lot, the first thing I noticed was how dilapidated everything looked around. I was familiar with this place, as my workplace was just a few blocks away, but I hadn't returned to the old neighborhood for years, and during this long absence, much had changed. Somewhere at the end of World War II, the building I was currently heading towards had transformed from a house where a family with children, and most likely a dog, lived, into a cozy bar for the neighborhood. At that time, it was a charming spot where neighbors would gather after work for a beer, and wives would meet their husbands to spend a pleasant evening together. Now, those old good times were long gone. Today, Baxtera was located in the poorest district of the most depressive suburb of Cleveland. There were more rundown buildings around it than residential ones, and most of them were covered in crude graffiti from local gangs. Abandoned cars near boarded-up storefronts, where some of these hulks served as shelters for people, cluttered the nearby streets and intersections with their metallic skeletons. This was the part of the city that fathers of the city had long forgotten. I just pulled my cap down a bit lower on my forehead and entered. The atmosphere of the old rundown bar assaulted all my senses simultaneously. The first attack came from the smell, a disgustingly sharp odor of beer and urine. Not the most appealing way to introduce the establishment to visitors. The second blow was directed at my eyes. The entire place was very dark, except for one corner illuminated by a bright light from some obscure mini projector. In that dimly lit area, a rather unattractive woman was slowly swaying, attempting some kind of dance on a table next to the bar. Lowering her head, she rocked back and forth in time with the music blaring from an old jukebox nearby. One of ZZ Top's classic hits, booming from the speakers, made my skin vibrate with each bass note, taken in by the dusty air. I knew that staying here for long in such deafening noise would surely deafen me, but I planned to do only what I came for and leave as quickly as possible. Once my eyes adjusted to the contrast between the illumination and its absence, I approached the bar counter, found a stool whose seat wasn't torn or sticky, and settled onto it. Barmenka at the other end of the counter was cleaning up the mess left by the swaying man who seemed to be barely holding on, trying not to test the strength of the old polished wood in front of him with his forehead. After finishing, she turned, tossed the rag into the sink, and washed her hands under the stream from the tap. I just sat there, waiting in my place, for her to notice me. I hadn't seen her in over 4 years. She had changed significantly over this long period, but I would recognize her anywhere. Remarkably, for many years, I had been keeping track of her and the events in her life, and she hadn't noticed me even once. Wondering if she would recognize me, I hoped she wouldn't. At that moment, she had her back to me. Her jeans, tucked into cowboy boots, clung to her hips much more than I remembered, and an unsightly layer of fat protruded over the top and hung over the tightened belt at her waist. She was dressed in a faded white t-shirt with the letters, Baxter's, on the back. Silver gray curls that formed her hairstyle fell to the middle of her back, gathered in a messy ponytail. It seemed like she hadn't used a brush or comb for a long time. From my bar stool, I could discern a collection of tattoos inked on her arms and neck, and I knew that besides these, there were others hidden from view in various places. Her face looked tired and grim. Her nose was crooked, and an uneven scar above one eye told the story of her challenging past. She didn't use cosmetics, as if that could somehow improve her appearance, and it seemed like a perpetual smirk had frozen on her lips. Overall, this bartender resembled a hardened hag, the kind you wouldn't want to meet alone in a dark alley. Her name was Sue Ann. Wiping her hands, she took a sip of alcohol from the glass by the sink. Shaking her hair to give it some semblance of order, she turned and surveyed her domain. It was then that she noticed the new customer, me. As she approached, the deafening music from the jukebox finally stopped, and the dancer descended from the table. "I'll be back in an hour," the worn-out stripper exclaimed, not even attempting to conceal her sagging breasts swaying in different directions as she passed us. "Okay," came the laconic response from the other side of the counter. The bartender stopped in front of me and asked, "What can I get you?" "Beer," I said, placing a $5 bill on the counter. She walked to the fridge and pulled out my beer. Opening it with a well-practiced click and placing the bottle in front of me, she took the money. Pausing to give me another scrutinizing look, she returned to the sink to wash the accumulated dirty glasses. I couldn't tell if she recognized me. Probably not. After all, a lot of time had passed, and as much as she had changed, I had changed just as much. Damn. Back then my head was adorned with a bunch of wavy light hair, and now there's more smooth skin than hair on my skull, which is why I always wear a baseball cap. The guy at the other end of the bar finally got what he wanted, and his head met the well-worn wood, causing his limp body to collapse onto the stained floor. "Damn it," came an irritated exclamation from the sink. "Elroy, why do you always treat me like this?" She stood there, wiping her hands again, and surveyed the room with disgust. "Can anyone help me drag this drunk to his car? How about you?" she asked, waving the rag in my direction. "All right," I replied evenly, placing my beer on the counter. The two of us had to lift, pull, drag, and then shove, bend, and stuff this extremely drunk guy from the floor where he collapsed like a sack to a somewhat sitting position behind the wheel of his car. As we were heading back to the bar, the drunk guy's car unexpectedly roared to life behind us, screeched, and sped down the street. However, we didn't hear the expected crash, so we just shrugged and continued our way back. "Thanks," said the bartender, placing another beer in front of me. "This clown puts on the same show about once a week. One day, he'll stop coming here when he crashes into something and shatters his drunken behind." For the second time since I walked in, she scrutinized me from head to toe. I couldn't read her thoughts, but I was curious if she would recognize me. "What's the matter?" I asked. "Nothing special," she drawled. "You just look familiar, that's all. Are you from around here?" "I'm from Texas. I'm just passing through, happened to walk by, and decided to drop in." Sliding me the same skeptical look, she returned to the sink, picked up the abandoned glass, and took another sip. Now that I could see better in the darkness, I surveyed the room again and noticed that I was the only patron left in the bar. Glancing around, I heard the clink of the glass being placed on the counter, and she muttered, "Shit." Her head sharply turned in my direction, and she stared at me with a mixed expression of recognition and disdain. "Ray, USS son of a bitch," she hissed incredulously, approaching and standing in front of me, hands on her thick hips. Pinch my eyes. "But how is this possible? You're supposed to be dead. I shot you 40 years ago." "Oops." There's the black cat suddenly out of the bag. "Well, actually, Sue Ann, you didn't kill me. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here now." I took a sip from my bottle and placed it on the counter. "Yes, everyone thought you did, but that's not the case. That's why you've been locked up in Marysville, state prison for women, for the past 38 years, for something you only thought about doing. I hope you had a pleasant time there." I grinned slyly. "Go to hell, you son of a bitch," she growled, burning me through with her gaze. "You're repeating yourself. You've already called me a son of a bitch. Maybe, for variety, you could try using some colorful expressions you learned from other killers and prostitute, the ones you shared cells with. Well, dear, let me see the real you, the tough and straight little bitch you've become. Show me the broken bitch from cell C." In the tense silence, I defiantly took another sip of my beer. Tilting the bottle slightly in my hand, I gestured with the neck toward the bewildered Sue Ann. "What's happening over there with you? It seems I notice a property of Big Vanda tattoo on your neck. Come on, she must have imparted more than just son of a bitch to you. I'm aware of those nights you spend with your head buried between her thick thighs, engaging intimately every time she passed gas. You must have experienced quite a lot. I'm also familiar with those occasions when she traded you to other groups for cigarettes. I've noticed the tattoos along your arms that tell the tale. They transferred you from cell to cell, putting you in compromising situations while you interacted with various individuals. Must have been quite an ordeal, Sue Ann." Shock, pain, and hatred flared in her glazed eyes, drilling into me. "I even know about the child you gave birth to by that huge black guard. What was his name? Malcolm, I think? Anyway, it doesn't matter. That little black baby you had to give away to Child Protective Services. So, as you can see, I know everything about you. From the very day you shot me in the head." She stood there, on the other side of the bar counter, staring at me with wide-open eyes, frozen in place like a marble statue. I just gave her a faint smile, leaned my elbows on the counter, and, resting my chin on interlocked fingers, watched her reaction critically. For a long while, standing and sitting across from each other, we stared into each other's eyes. Neither of us moved or averted our gaze. She blinked first when she turned and took a few uncertain steps to pour herself another drink, this time a larger one. I took the opportunity and leisurely lifted my bottle as well. Sue Ann stood by the sink, placing both hands on the countertop on either side of her, and, slightly turning her head, glanced askance at the reflection of me hanging in the mirror before her. She didn't utter a word, but I could almost hear the rustle of thoughts swirling in her mind. She took another big sip from her glass, exhaled, and turned towards me. So, what the hell are you doing here? I smiled and took another sip. I just wanted to see how you're doing. Maybe we could reminisce about old times? You know, indulge in memories of the past. Her face changed when she lowered her gaze to the floor. The stern expression softened, shoulders slumped, and she somehow shrank, her ratty tail slipping down, covering one breast. When she raised her head again, I could swear she looked sad and tormented. I didn't believe it for a second. Before me was still the woman who betrayed me with that scumbag lawyer. The same woman who traded me like some old, no longer needed car, for a new, wealthier, and more respectable husband. The same woman who coldly shot me in the head and set my trailer on fire, burning my body beyond recognition. Finally, she was the woman who blew her new husband's brains out on the living room carpet when he became a nuisance. No, I wouldn't buy a single word that came from her faded lips. She spoke softly and wearily when she asked, "What do you want from me, Ray?" I served my time and paid my debt in full. I'll be on parole for the rest of my life, so, you have nothing to worry about. Our son? I haven't seen Robbie in these damn 40 years. I don't even know where he is now. Your mother and father made it very clear that they want nothing to do with me, and Robbie will never know what I did. Hell, he probably has already forgotten about my existence. I'll never see him again. So either say what you need or get the hell out of here. Another long sip from the bottle, and another smile from me. I just wanted you to know that your treacherous betrayal, kicking me out, and, finally, putting a bullet in my head were the best things that ever happened to me. Amazing, isn't it? Seriously, it's the best thing in my entire life. You'll ask why? It's quite simple. If you hadn't done what you did, I wouldn't have become rich, now having more money than I can ever spend. I wouldn't have a wonderful loving wife who worships the ground I walk on, and I love her more than anything in the world. If it weren't for you, we wouldn't have our 3 biological children and we wouldn't have 5 more foster children. I would not have 7 grandchildren now. The pale skin of Sue Ann began to flush with red patches, and a thin vein on her temple swelled and pulsed as I quietly told her about myself and the life she missed out on. I wouldn't be a member of Kavana, an international nonprofit organization, or the Chamber of Commerce, wouldn't have joined the country club and city council. I wouldn't have built from scratch and sold 2 companies, the combined income of which secures a comfortable and prosperous life for my children and my grandchildren. I wouldn't have traveled around the world and seen the 7 wonders of the world. Without what you did, I wouldn't have made love to my wife on top of a mountain in Peru, under the most unbelievably starry sky we've ever seen. I wouldn't have achieved any of this. Thanks to you, I've got everything a man could dream of. That's why I just wanted to come in and thank you for everything. I watched as she stood there, slightly lowering her head and covering her eyes, seemingly reflecting nostalgically on what she had and what could have been. She served a sentence of 38 endless years for crimes she didn't commit. I had 40 years of a wonderful, love-filled life. She struggled at the bottom, amidst the most incredible filth, committing the most repulsive, twisted acts just to survive. I, on the other hand, thrived and grew under the sunlight and clear sky. Now in her early 60s, she spent her days in a rundown, smelly bar and lived in a room upstairs. I lived in a beautiful mansion and frequented the country club. Life was so unfair. When I thought about it, I couldn't help but laugh. Thanks for rubbing it in, Ray, she spoke in an almost lifeless voice. I've spent every minute of every day regretting my choices, and I've had a whole lot of time to think about it. Now I'm too old and worn out to do anything else but live my crappy life day by day. Maybe, if I'm lucky, I'll quietly die in my bed. But I don't think so because everything in my life has gone sideways, one thing after another. I fell into the cesspool, and I'll probably kick the bucket right there. There's nothing you can say to me that could make it worse. Hell is hell, Ray. So, thanks for stopping by. And now, get the hell out of here. She turned her face back to the sink and downed the remnants of what was in her glass. Well, thanks for the beer, I said, placing the empty bottle on the counter. You can keep the change. I turned and headed for the door. I have a question before you leave. Her hoarse voice reached me from behind. Why did you stay alive? Who did I shoot? I stopped in the semi-darkness and turned to look at her one last time. This time I didn't have a smile, but I still answered. It was my friend, Mac. He was the guy the first sometimes let stay overnight in my trailer. Mac had pneumonia, and he passed away that morning when you came and did what you intended to do with me. Apparently, you assumed that since Mac slept in my bed and was about my height and weight, it was me. As I found out later, he was already dead by the time you splattered his brains all over the pillow. I returned just at the moment when you jumped into your car and sped away. I hid in the bushes when the firefighters and the police arrived, and they thought it was me in the trailer that burned to the ground. That night, the Ray you knew disappeared, and I became Mac. From then on, Ray was dead, while Mac had a whole new life ahead. However, there was one more thing left for me to do as Ray. On the night you shot your lawyer husband, I was there. You never knew about it, but I was there. I waited until you passed out after your evening binge, and when Mr. Jerk returned home, I put a bullet in his forehead, just like you cold-bloodedly shot Mac, thinking it was me. After that, I placed the gun in your hand and took the contents of his secret safe. You took responsibility for his murder and mine. The money I took from that lawyer jerk gave me the necessary starting capital when I began a new life under a different name. Your life went to hell, and I moved to Texas. So, Sue Ann, everything I did because of how you treated me, because I loved you, and you pissed on my love and tried to take away my life. You know, as they say in the Bible, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. You damn well angered me, and I made sure your life turned into a living hell. Now, have I answered your question, stupid, selfish bitch? The deed was done, and the chewed-up back cover of the old book was closed. Exiting the bar, I flipped the worn-out sign to closed.
Thank you for being with us and listening until the end. If you found it interesting, please subscribe, give us a like, and leave your comments. And we'll see you on the Cheating Secrets channel.